I think the biggest story of the day is the Buffalo Bills agreeing to terms with guard Conor McGovern of the Dallas
Hmm.
Cowboys. Not the one that Shaq Lawson was beefing with, by the way. There's two Conor McGoverns in the NFL. Other one is a member of
Same
the New
exact
York
thing.
Jets. Yeah, I think also a free agent, but a 3-year, $23 million deal for Conor McGovern. Started 15 games last year at left guard, replacing
Yep.
Connor Williams, who went to Miami. He started previously in spot duty as a backup to Zach Martin and Connor Williams at left guard and center in years past. He was a 3rd-round pick, 6'5", 318 pounds. So he sort of fits that Bills archetype. Noted by many to be a much better pass blocker than a run blocker. These are the types of dudes that you sort of bet on in free agency at 25 years old. What are your thoughts on this Connor McGovern deal?
Yeah, and ultimately you kind of look at some of the clips and some of the reps that Anthony and Eric have been sharing
Yeah,
now, and the videos out now on the Cover One YouTube page as well. Like, kudos to those guys for getting that video out
they're the
as
best.
quickly as they did. Like, for if you want to go and look at a deep dive of Conor McGovern, go ahead and check that video out as well. But as far as the signing, right? Um,
Mhm.
Number one, I love that the Bills went for a younger player on the interior, and this is something that throughout the past couple years, where the Bills have tried to put in um, stopgap type players on that interior. Outside of going way back to, let's say, John Feliciano, they've brought in older guys. We'll say, right? They brought in like a Greg Van Roten, who was, I believe, 30 plus. Obviously, they signed Rogers Saffold. They've brought in other guys in the past from the Jets as well. Aging sort of interior offensive linemen. So this to me feels like a signing of, we like where this player's at now in his trajectory, and we feel like in a year's time, maybe, or 2 years' time, this could look like a really real value signing for the Bills. Getting a guy who's only 25 years old and will only be 25 entering the season as well. Doesn't turn 26, I believe, until November. As you mentioned, graded out well as pass blocker, and that's
Mhm.
something obviously the Bills struggled with this year, as Eric pointed out. Right, is that when Josh Allen got that pressure up the middle, notably, it was escape. It was escape and improv for him, and
Mhm.
trying to make things happen. So shoring that up the middle, especially from a pass blocking standpoint, will be um, a big boon. And then the other thing I like about this signing is, like you mentioned, he's played all across the interior of the offensive line. They're paying him starters money, obviously, but this now gives you options heading into the summer and heading into camp with Ryan Bates, and potentially at the future of Mitch Morse as well. Not saying
Mhm.
for 2023, but for beyond. You can now optimize sort of what you do with your guard spots
Yeah.
now that you have a guy like Ryan Bates, who has played left guard and right guard, and a guy like Conor McGovern, who has played both. Maybe it ends up being that Ryan Bates goes back to left guard and Conor McGovern goes into
Yeah.
that right guard spot, and he had 100 snaps at center over the last 2 years. So
Mhm.
for me, I think it's a good move. You look at some of the money like guys like Lindstrom got, and you look at the deal that McGovern got. It's a pretty, it's a sizable move, but it's not like a
Mhm.
one of those that's going to be the headline of free agency,
Yeah.
right? For when you look across the NFL. And then finally and lastly, which I think we all know
Mhm.
and we all like to have going into the draft, is it now doesn't pigeonhole you into kind
Yeah.
of forcing yourself to that position early in the draft. So all around,
Yeah.
a good move for the Bills, even if it's not the flashiest.
Yeah, Collins comes in and says, "I hope they still, draft O line." And I'm with you because when you look at Connor McGovern, he was drafted in the 3rd round by Dallas, and he didn't start until the 4th year of his contract. Why? Because there were two very good guards in front of him in Zach Martin and Connor Williams. That didn't stop Dallas from drafting a guy in the middle rounds of the draft, in the 3rd round of the draft, who was a spot starter when they needed some reps at center, who was a spot starter before Connor Williams left when they needed reps at guard, who developed for years and then was able to start in year 4 and then get this contract from the Buffalo Bills, a guy who's played tight end, a guy who's played fullback for them in sort of blocking situations. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you're probably out of the Osiris Torrence at 28 sweepstakes, even though they probably never were in it. And you're
Mhm.
probably maybe even out of like the 2nd round territory. But if you have a Luke Whippler or a Joe Tippmann who slips to the 3rd. There are a ton of middle round guards that we
Lots of
like in this draft class, you're sitting there in the third round. Maybe this is the year that you do pull the trigger on a guy in the third round, like maybe they should have last year in Dylan Parham, or the fourth round. Maybe you pull the trigger on an interior offensive lineman, or maybe even two in the latter half of the draft, because, as you mentioned, Mitch Morse is getting up there, and now you have two guys with some flex, Ryan Bates and Connor McGovern, who could possibly take over that center spot a year from now, 2 years from now. And then that guy you draft this year develops and then kicks in, and he's also provides good depth. So a lot of options for the Buffalo Bills, because these are some versatile pieces in Bates, McGovern, and Bucker.
Yeah, and the Butker move was good as a kind of like a table setter,
Mm-hmm.
but the Bills are not necessarily done here, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? I mean, we went into last year, we signed Saffold, we signed Van Roten, we brought Quessenberry in, right? Like there was a lot. We brought Bobby Hart in to play guard as well. Like there was quite a bit of a rotation at that interior last year. So by all means,
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe the Bills are done here because at this point, you really don't have the bodies to go into a training camp yet either
Mm-hmm.
for a full like second and third team type rotations. You've got kind of your three guys, um, you know, with Butker, Bates, and now McGovern. But like, what do you really have beyond
Mm-hmm.
that remains to be seen. So I don't think the Bills are necessarily done addressing the position.
Yeah, Justin comes in with an NC State guy right here, Chandler Zavala, in the fourth or the
Yeah.
fifth wouldn't be bad. I'm a big fan of Chandler Zavala at 6'5", 325. I don't know, like maybe he's a little too heavy set for the Buffalo Bills at 325, but 6'5" certainly fits within the archetype of a Buffalo Bills interior player. I know Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion is a guy that Eric Turner is high on.
I like
I've
him
really
too.
started to fall in love with him as a guy you move in from tackle to guard. And there's John Gaines, who had a really good combine. He's got that right guard center flex. So, I mean, we could go on and on for days about interior offensive linemen that are in the middle of the draft here for the Buffalo Bills. But to me, my first question for Brandon Beane, if I was a beat reporter and had the privilege of asking him a question on Wednesday when he does his presser, my first question to him would be, and I would press him a little bit if he tries to evade the answer too. Like my number one question would be, is Conor McGovern starting at left guard or right guard for you when you open up OTAs? And if Brandon Beane goes, well, we'll see. I would challenge him, be like, come on, Brandon. Like, is it really a competitive advantage not telling us whether he's a left guard or a right guard? Is it
But I will
really
say,
like
devil's advocate,
you
he
know?
might not know. He
Yeah.
really might
Oh,
not
you
know.
you sign that guy knowing exactly where you're gonna put him. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like that's why
probably.
like I feel like I would probably get into it. Like that's why I'll never be a beat reporter, because I would push back a little bit. I'd be like, come on, dude. Like, come on. Like when if he tries to be coy with that question, I would check him on some of that BS, because that would be my first question to him. Because we've been talking about on this show, all of the Dallas guys who cover Dallas and have watched McGovern play over the last 4 years said he was a better right guard than he was left guard. Now the sample size is much smaller at right guard than it was at left guard, but they said when he played at right guard, it was better. Kind of sounds like Ryan Bates, who had a smaller sample size at left guard, was better, then kicked to right guard, who struggled. So the dream scenario to me would be Bates at left guard, McGovern at right guard, and then that sort of solidifies you from left tackle to right guard. And then comes the question of, well, what do we do with Spencer Brown? And
Yep.
do we go out? Do we look at the free agent market for a Cameron Fleming type of guy? You saw guys like Mike McGlinchey getting paid today, Jawan Taylor getting paid today. Obviously, the Bills were probably never in the sweepstakes for those guys.
Mm.
But I'm telling you what, like I'm starting to get a feeling, I'm starting to get a vibe that at pick number 28 or 27, whatever you want to refer to it as, I think Anton Harrison, Darnell Wright, or DeJuan Jones from Ohio State could be in play for the Buffalo Bills. Aaron Quinn mentioned at the Senior Bowl that Brandon Beane seemed pretty zoned in to the offensive line, and watching guys like Darnell Wright at the Senior Bowl. Now, that's not the most scientific of ways of assessing whether the Bills want to address right tackle in the draft, but I really wouldn't be shocked if the Buffalo Bills pulled the trigger right tackle first round.